Let's make some custom lettering in Illustrator. So last week, the new line of revised skateboards came out, the spring 2019 line, and I'm super proud of all the work that went into it. The pro boards were super fun to do, came up with a new lifeline, and the block stack, but my favorite is this retro type board. I've pitched this idea to Brian and Andy a few times in the past, this sort of type that's made up of multiple lines. I just always thought it would make a cool deck, a big revive in this kind of typeface. So I finally got it in there, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to show you how I make custom type for stuff like skateboards or t-shirt designs or anything really. So let's jump onto the computer and I'll show you how I do it. Welcome to Adobe Illustrator CC, the perfect program for creating your own custom typography. So what you're looking at here is my working file for the retro logo skateboard. You can see all kinds of experimentation and iteration happening in this file. So to give you a general idea of the process for creating this skateboard, you can see here I started with this sketch in the skateboard template. I did a bunch of different letters and trying to figure out the exact shapes, and it looks like these are pretty close to what the final design finally worked out to be. So I'm going to open up a new file and show you exactly how I made these letters. Alright, the first step is to turn on the grid. So you just go up here to View and then Show Grid. The other thing we want to do is make sure that everything we're doing is locked to the grid. So we're going to go back up to View and then Snap to Grid. Just going to zoom in here so we can see the grid a little bit better. To make these letters, we're going to be using a few different tools. The first one is the pen tool. This is what we're going to use to create the paths of the letters. We're going to be using the direct selection tool to manipulate the anchor points along the paths. We'll also be using the scissors tool, which you can find under the eraser tool. And then we'll be using the corner widget things. I don't know exactly what they're called, but I'll show you how those work a little bit later on. Okay, so I always start with a sketch. So I'm just pasting the sketch in here. And this is just a really messy sketch that I made in Photoshop on top of the board template. So these are the actual dimensions of the board. The purpose of the sketch is just to get an idea of the scale and dimensions, the height and width of the letters. So we're going to keep this sketch handy right here and start creating our R. So I'm going to grab the pen tool. And for these letters, I'm not going to be using shapes, I'm going to be using lines. So we want to make a path with a stroke around it. So this section on the toolbar right here is the fill and the stroke. We don't want a fill, we want a stroke, so I'm going to click on that and then come over here to the color palette and click black. We'll just be working in black and white. Okay, with our sketch as reference, we're just going to start making this path with the pen tool. So I've selected the pen tool and I'm going to start making this R shape. Now there's a couple things to notice here. So I want to end this path right here on this anchor point, but you can see that I'm still connected to the path. Wherever I move my cursor, it shows the line where the path is going to continue. But if I hold down Control or Command on a Mac, you can see that the cursor changes to the direct selection tool. So I can use that to click off of the path, and now I've deselected the path. And when I let go of Control, it turns back to the pen tool. So that's an easy way to select and deselect stuff while staying on the pen tool, just by holding down the Control key. The second thing to notice is that we have a really thin line. So the stroke on this line is 1 point. So I'm looking over here in the stroke menu. If you need to bring up the stroke menu, you can just go to Window, Stroke, and it'll be somewhere over here on your toolbar. But if I select this path, you can see that the weight is 1 point. So we're going to go ahead and bump that up to 25 point weight line. So now we're getting somewhere. I want these letters to be made up by 3 lines. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding in my second line here. Okay, now you'll notice I just started clicking around and the space in between these 2 paths is super uneven. So I like the space here and on this side, but this space in between the lines is too much and the space up here is too little. So to adjust this path, we're going to go select the direct selection tool. And what this tool allows you to do is select the anchor points along the path and adjust them. So you can go and click on an anchor point and move it just like this, clicking and then dragging the anchor points. Or you can select multiple anchor points by clicking on a single anchor point, holding down Shift, and then clicking another one. So you can see that these 2 anchor points I've selected are filled in just by holding down Shift. And you can move them around by using the arrow keys on your keyboard. So I can move this all over the place just by clicking on the arrow keys. So now we have nice even spacing around the 2 lines. I'm going to go back to the pen tool and draw in my 3rd line. Now we have the nice beginning stages of an R. Let's get the last little bit figured out here. Again, just using the pen tool. Okay, so we can see that this space right here is a little too big, so I'm jumping back to the direct selection tool, holding down Shift to select multiple anchor points and just scooting them over. Now the other thing is there's not very much space right here in between the tail, I don't know what it's called, the tail of the R and the loop. That's what we're going to call them. So what I'm going to do is, with the direct selection tool, click and drag to select all of these anchor points. So you can see that the solid anchor points are the ones that are selected and the hollow ones are not. And then with the arrow keys, I'm just going to bump this up a little bit. Something like that. Now that's looking a little bit more like an R. Okay, so I'm going to go grab the selection tool, click and drag to select the whole thing, and we're going to move it over here just to see the sketch. And I think that's actually pretty good. So this is all going to get manipulated, and we'll probably shrink everything down later, but right now I think this looks good. So we know our letters are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches wide by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches tall. So that's looking pretty good. Okay, but this R is far from done. So what I'm going to do is, with the selection tool, select it all again, hold down Alt or Option on the Mac, and you can see that when I hover over the selected paths, the cursor changes and there's 2 little cursors there. So if you click and drag, that makes a copy. Now we can manipulate this new letter and not have to worry about, if we make some change that we don't like, we can go back and work from the old thing. Think of it as like keeping a history of your work. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and you can see we have a few uneven bits here. So because we are snapped to this grid, our pieces aren't lining up exactly. So I'm going to go up here to View and turn off Snap to Grid. And now, using the direct selection tool, we can start making some adjustments. I'm going to select some of these points, and using the arrow key, just sort of move it over so we're all lined up here. And then same with this, I'm just holding down Shift to select these points, and we're just going to scooch them over to line up there. And then I think I'll do the same here, selecting them and scooting them down using the arrow keys. So now we have a nice even R. So I'm going to go back up to view, turn on snap to grid. We're going to grab the selection tool, select everything, hold down Alt to copy it over. Alright, now comes the fun part. So we're going to grab the direct selection tool and select these 2 points here. Now we zoom in, you can see that these 2 little bullseye circles pop up on the anchor points that you have selected. This is the corner rounding widget. I don't know if that's what it's actually called. That's what I'm going to call it. If you click and drag on the corner rounder, it will round the corner. So we're just going to go through this whole thing, select the corners we want to round by using the direct selection tool, holding down shift to select multiple spots, and clicking and dragging on the corner widget. Now here's another thing you'll notice. So you can see that as I am dragging this corner widget, there's this little box that shows the radius of the corner. Sometimes that might be missing. If you go up here to view and then turn on smart guides, that will show the radius. So now I can click and make sure I'm getting my radiuses of these corners all lined up correctly. And maybe we'll do 0.25. And then 0.75, and then what is it, 1.25? Does that look right? There we go. All right, and now we've made ourselves a pretty nice looking R. All right, now that we're done creating the first letter, it should be really easy to create more. So we know the width of the stroke, we know how much space is in between each of the lines, we know how tall and how wide the letters are. So now really it's all about using that pen tool, using the direct selection tool to tweak and move around your points to create some more letters. Let's jump back into the computer and I'll explain how using this one R I can create the E, the V, and the I, and any other letters now that we've figured out this part. Let's go. Alright, so let's make this E. I'm going to go back and use this R, the one that we created before the rounded corners, and dragging it down to make a copy. Zooming in. Alright, so the cool thing about creating the R first is that it gives us a lot to work with. So the R has the left and right verticals and then all 3 horizontals. Now, I didn't go to design school, so I didn't learn all the correct terminology and everything, but I don't know, over the years I've picked up a few things, and of course it can be broken, but one of the rules of creating a typeface is usually if they have like a center line going through, in this case the middle part of the R is going to be the same as the middle part of an E. So we can use that information and really easily make this E from the R. So instead of completely redrawing this thing, we are going to grab the scissors tool and we're going to cut it up a little bit. If you have the scissors tool and you don't want to go back and forth between selecting the scissors and the direct selection tool, while on the scissors tool, you can hold down Control and it'll turn into the selection tool. So we've selected this path and now we have the scissors tool and we can snip it. So I'm going to snip these 2 pieces, and you can see there's a little visual glitch that happens in Illustrator, but if we just zoom in, it'll fix it. And now I can, while holding down Control again, get the selection tool, grab this line, hit backspace, and now maybe you can see where we're going with this. So I'm just going to select and snip, select, delete, select, and snip, select and snip, and then delete. And now we have something that looks a little bit more like an E. So I'm going to go back to Direct Selection tool and drag these points over. And drag these over so they're all even. Actually, I might want to take these lines in just a little bit. Give it some dimension here. Okay, let's cut these as well. So, scissors tool, make a snip, delete, control, snip, delete. To select this path, snip, delete. I think what I want to do is have this part connect. All right, so now we have these two separated paths that we need to connect, right? I'm going to zoom in here, and with the direct selection tool, I'm going to select this anchor point, and then holding shift, I'm going to select the anchor point of this path, and then it's just a matter of going to object, path, join, and it snaps those two paths together. If we select this path with the direct selection tool, you can see we have this extra little anchor. If you hit minus on your keyboard or go up here to the delete anchor point tool, you can just get rid of that guy. So now I'm going to go back this one. I'm just going to drag him over here, and then we're going to drag both of these over, and then I'm going to switch to the pen tool, which is right here. And if you hover the pen tool over an end point of a path, the final anchor of a path, you'll see this little line pop up, the pen tool. That means you can continue the path. So I'm just going to click and then join these two paths. And then we are just going to click with the direct selection tool and anchor, and then Control or Command J is the shortcut for joining. And then get rid of that anchor point. I'm going to select these two anchor points, Control J to join them, and then get rid of that dude. And now we have a nice looking E to go with our R. Alright, so using all of those tools at your disposal, you should be able to make a copy of this E, holding down Alt, drag, make a copy. Always make copies of your stuff, round the corners, and then get started on the V and the I. I know I went over everything really quickly, and I was zipping around and moving stuff around, using shortcuts. If you're interested in hearing more about my workflow and how I get things done super quickly in Illustrator with all the shortcuts and tools and tricks and everything, leave a comment below. If enough people ask, I'll do an extensive Illustrator shortcuts for illustrators and designers video. I think it'd be pretty interesting, but it'd have to be very in-depth. Okay, I'm not going to repeat all the same steps over and over again. At this point, it's just a matter of creating the letters and getting them in the template. So let's fast forward ahead to the very end of the process. Alright, so this is the finished graphic in the template ready to be sent off. So once I figured out how the type fits on the board in the template in Illustrator, I will take it into Photoshop and apply distressing on top of it. Whenever I do distressing on the Revive boards, I kind of do it in this way to keep things consistent across seasons, and I've come up with this method based on something I learned from a really awesome designer named Brandon Reich. I think I've mentioned him a few times on this channel before. I'm going to put a link down in the description to a class he has on Creative Live all about how he does distressing. It's really awesome. You should definitely check it out. Okay, after I've added the texture, then it's just a matter of picking colors and getting it into this template. So the template I've been using this whole time is based on the manufacturer we use. So with skateboards, they all have a very particular shape. There's a bunch of different shapes, and each manufacturer should have their own template for you to use. So it's important that I use this template because it's who is printing the board. So they need to have their files set up in a really particular way so it's easy for them to get the artwork on the board. So I'm not gonna give you guys the template, because if you start using this template and then send your board somewhere else, those people are gonna be like, what is this template? What are you using? You have to get the template from the place you're printing the board. I hope that all makes sense. And that's it. Once you send the board off to the printer, you just have to wait a month or two and you'll get the boards back. So I know I say this all the time. It really is awesome creating something from nothing, just doing some work on the computer and then having it show up a couple months later as a skateboard. Creating designs for skateboards is something I've always wanted to do. This has become a dream job for me. I'm so happy I get to do it and share it with you. Even if you don't get to have your artwork on a bunch of skateboards, there's still places where you can make one-off boards. So if you create some custom type or something that you want to skate, there are websites where you can get one board printed. So it's super fun to do, to actually have the thing that you're creating. You know, you can do it with skateboards, you can do it with t-shirts, you can do it with posters, anything you want. I think it's very gratifying to create something that actually becomes a physical object. So don't just stay on the computer, make actual things. Okay, I know I went over some of the last parts of this whole process of creating the actual skateboard really quickly. Illustrator can be kind of intimidating, but if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll answer any questions I get there and help explain some of the things I didn't cover totally well in the video. I've made videos in the past. I'll put a link down to the Designing for Revive playlist. So I have a bunch of videos all about creating skateboards. If you'd like to see more of my artwork, I post comics, stuff about my D&D game, lots and lots of stuff about Revive on my Instagram and Twitter, so be sure to follow me there. And yes, just thank you so much for checking out this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Keep drawing.